I want everybody to think about an environment where you can be productive at work, right? Think about that space that you carve out for yourself that allows you to do your best work. Everybody have something in mind? Maybe it looks a little something like this, right? You got the noise-canceling headphones on, right? Full cup of coffee, ready to rock and roll, no distractions, no nothing, life is good, right? But of course, this isn't how things get done in the real world, right? We have to work with other people. We have to talk to other people, right? Our work is done with other people for other people, right? That means having meetings, hovering art directors, right? Pair sessions, code reviews, stand-ups, Slack channels. Oh my God, so many Slack channels. Is anyone else overwhelmed by that? I'm like, it's crazy, yeah. So this is a talk about how we work with each other, how we talk to each other, how we coordinate with each other, and how we collaborate with each other. Anybody feeling like their blood pressure just went up a little bit, right? There are all these eternal battles in the, in the design and development world. So let's have a little fun. Let's hear it for the Photoshop people. Yeah, come on, Photoshop enthusiasts. How about versus the sketch people? Where are my sketch people at? All right. Where are my, Drupal people? Like one dude is, yeah! WordPress people instead. All right, alrighty. Spaces people. Tabs people. Yeah, all right. Some of this stuff is just sort of cheeky personal preference or whatever, but some of these things have real implications on how things get done, right? How work gets put in front of our end users. Like, these things matter. And how many people have ever worked on a project where somebody was just like ultra jazzed up about using a certain technology or tool that it just sort of like overrode the rest of the process? Has that ever been you? It's like, this new thing got published yesterday. We're totally doing that, right? So if everyone had their way and we're all able to sort of pick and choose from this whole, platter of stuff, you end up in sort of this chaos, right? You end up in this situation where everything is just, it's a free-for-all. Developer 1's using Angular, developer 2's using React, this person's using that tool, this person's using this other tool. So that's obviously anarchy or whatever. It doesn't exactly lead to great collaboration between teams. So, okay, well, what's the alternative? Like total lockdown mode, right? Wherever everybody is forced into using sort of certain tools or certain technologies or doing things a certain way, like rule with an iron fist. This is a dictatorship, right? So we have this spectrum, right? Somewhere in between complete chaos, where everybody's just allowed to do anything that they want, and then this sort of stifling rigidity on the other end of the spectrum, where it's like, your opinion doesn't matter at all. So where's your sweet spot on the spectrum, right? You and your team, like where do you fall in this spectrum? And the answer is going to be different depending on who's in your organization, how you're set up, and stuff like that. But I think that, what we're really trying to get at is this environment where sort of everyone understands the role they play in the, overall project and the overall organization. Everyone knows exactly what they're expected to do, how stuff gets done, what's considered good work, what's considered bad work, and stuff like that, right? So good work happens when people know this stuff. And this enters into the realm of sort of principles and guidelines. And in thinking about this stuff, I think that there's a bit of a hierarchy across the board when it comes to principles and guidelines. And so I'll start with sort of the base company level, right? A company, whatever company you work at, is made up of a bunch of different people, and many of them have different roles and do different things, right? You have, a marketing department, you have a sales department, you might have a digital department, an engineering department, customer support, right? You have the executives, you have, accountants, HR people, or whatever, right? And whenever you open up the door and you say, okay, everybody, let's do business, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to go and run and do business in the way that I see fit, right? But that doesn't always, involve everybody moving in the right direction. It becomes a bit like the sort of parable of the blind men and the elephant, wherever, these blind men approach an elephant and, the one's touching the leg and it's like, oh, an elephant's like a tree. And, one's touching the trunk and, oh, an elephant is like a snake and stuff like that, right? Nobody has the full picture. And so as a result, they sort of act based on their own perspective of the organization. And of course, especially as organizations get bigger and bigger, it's harder and harder to sort of see that full picture. So what principles and guidelines do is sort of help set the stage for what's expected, like what you should care about if you work at this company, right? This takes many forms, in the form of a mission statement, right? Charity Water is a nonprofit organization bringing clean and safe drinking water to people in developing nations. Boom, right? That's what we're all about. That's what we're doing, right? That's great. It's also a little abstract. So a lot of organizations will take it a step further and sort of establish these company values. Zappos sort of famously has these 10 core values: deliver wow through service, enhance and drive change, right? Create fun and a little weirdness, right? Like these principles, which of course they go on to further articulate, help give people an understanding, irrespective of their role in the organization. This is how things get done here. Here's what we consider to be good behavior. Here's what we consider to be bad behavior. If you want to get a raise, if you're a customer support person or whatever, like these are some values that you can apply to your specific role in order to really thrive here. But of course, values, oftentimes are aspirational, fly the friendly skies, and not going so well, maybe, I don't know. But so a company culture is really, really important. Whenever I started researching this talk, it gets into like weird business suit consultant sort of stuff a little too hard. It's a little hard to digest some of the stuff, but the one book I read by a guy named Chris Edmonds, he talked about this notion of having an organizational constitution that specifies your team's purpose, values, and behaviors. This idea of sort of like liberating rules, like you basically put these things down so people know how to behave in certain situations. And I actually really like that word, liberating rules. So that's sort of the base, right? Everybody working at a company can follow these values, follow these principles in order to get aligned. So now let's move into, say, a marketing department, right? And some of you might work within a marketing department. It depends on how your company's structured or whatever, but you might have management, public relations, and research, and digital people, and social people, and all sorts of people, VPs and CMOs and whatever. And again, it's like, okay, everybody, let's do marketing, and everybody's going to apply their own sort of perspective to that. So again, we have to establish these principles and guidelines to say, here's actually what that means. Here's what doing marketing here means. Here's what communication means for us. And this takes a form of sort of brand guidelines, right? So this is Ubuntu's wonderful brand guidelines around how they use their logo, right? What the incorrect usages of their logo is, what the spacing around it is. Here's what colors we use. Here's our neutral palettes. Here's the sort of tints and tones of this stuff. Here's our fonts and how to think about them. Here's these pictograms and how we think about that stuff. Here's these patterns that we use throughout our brand materials and stuff like that. So making this stuff explicit, giving people some guidelines around how people are expected to interact with your brand identity is really helpful for anyone who's communicating on behalf of the brand. The other sort of guidelines that work at this level are voice and tone guidelines. MailChimp sort of famously has voiceandtone.com, which is a really fantastic resource. But they have this super strong brand, this super clever brand and stuff, and they have these, in their voice and tone guidelines, they articulate how people are expected to talk and communicate to their users in different scenarios, right? So they have this very cheeky, fun, tone of voice usually, and so, the idea is, if a user just finished a campaign, you want to, sort of congratulate them. And so you say, fine piece of work, you deserve a raise. Here comes the little chimpanzee dancing across the screen or whatever. That's great. But you don't want the little dancing chimpanzee to come across as you just spammed 30,000 users, whoopsie, right? That doesn't work. So they have to be explicit with how people are expected to communicate with their users in different scenarios. Then getting up to the teams level, so teams plural, right? So how many people work at organizations that have multiple teams doing different products or different parts of a product or different parts of a site? Yeah, so this is a lot of people, right? So now we're in the same situation, right? Okay, everybody, let's do websites. Everybody's going to go off in their own direction, and again, the Angular people and the React people come out, and the Drupal people come out, whatever, right? So we have this idea of sort of special snowflake syndrome where whenever you try to sort of unify this stuff and get this stuff together, a former client of mine said, design systems, this whole idea of sort of creating a unifying language for our stuff, it's sort of like public transportation. It's a good idea, but not for me. It's like sure, yeah, I think that we should be on subways and whatever, but it's you don't understand. I'm different. I need a car, right? I need to drive around and have this freedom and stuff. So we have to overcome that. So again, principles and guidelines come into play to sort of help align everybody doing websites or doing web apps or whatever the kids call them these days, and get them all on the same page. And this is the realm of design systems. And thankfully, we've seen so many great examples over the last few years. Salesforce's Lightning Design System, Material Design, of course, IBM's Carbon Design System. This is one that I worked on for a big enterprise recently. But these design systems and accompanying style guides sort of help round up, all the things that go into doing design and development at the organization. This is our sort of official story of here's how we do stuff here, right? And that includes, overarching principles, which we'll talk about more. High-level UX guidelines, here's data display, here's how we, enter data, here's how we think about navigation, here's how we think about color, here's our code conventions, right? All the way through to these low-level components, right? Here's our different form controls, here's what a hero block looks like, here's what you should be thinking about as you're using this hero block, right? So we'll talk more about that in a bit. And then we get sort of further up the pyramid, right, into an individual team. And those individual teams are made up of different disciplines, right? So you got a UX designer, front-end people, visual designers, QA folks, project managers, scrum masters, and stuff like that, right? And so again, everybody, let's do websites, right? Let's make this specific website for the specific application or whatever. And again, everybody comes to that with a sense of perspective and stuff. So once again, these principles and guidelines help align everybody. And this is sort of building on that design system work, but it's actually applying it to a specific application, right? So if you're making a UI that's going in front of doctors and nurse practitioners and things like that, you're going to have a specific persona in mind, you're going to have specific objectives and stuff like that in mind. So you need to come to establish some principles and guidelines about how you're going to solve their needs. And then lastly, at the sort of top of the pyramid, and I guess maybe it's adjacent, but you have a bunch of people working across an organization that all sort of do the same thing, right? So you got a bunch of front-end people. And again, front-end people, as it turns out, have opinions about things. Like developers have opinions on stuff. It's sort of weird, but it happens. And again, strong opinions. Oh my God. All right, so everybody ends up in their own sort of thing wherever they're going in every which direction. So we need, once again, principles and guidelines to sort of help guide the way. So what does this look like? This takes the form of sort of code style guides, right? There's all these different CSS methodologies, ways to architect everything. You have to make these decisions. Like, is this how we do it? 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 Right? So it's like you have to make these calls, right, and come to a conclusion. But once you do that stuff, everyone is aligned. Everyone knows what to expect. Everyone knows what's expected of them. So these sort of 5 things, all sort of work in tandem. If things are set up properly, there's sort of a straight line. Everything is in alignment, right? Where the front-end style guides will build upon, the underlying design system stuff, which will build upon the brand stuff, which will build upon everything else. But really the realm of design systems is at this sort of teams and team level, right? So everybody doing work, everybody doing stuff for an organization is really important. So these design systems have really sort of come on the scene and are really solving some really thorny problems, especially as our digital landscape just keeps getting bigger and bigger. There's more devices, there's more stuff, there's more content, there's more pressure to produce more stuff in less time and all that stuff. Ship it, right? All of that. So these design systems help us maintain our sanity as we go down this path, right? So there's many benefits of design systems, like promoting UI consistency and cohesion, right? So not reinventing the wheel so you have like 50 different button styles or whatever, as Nathan, I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit. But it's like, so that's great, and that's the main thing that gets put in front of the users. But if you look at the rest of these benefits, right? Faster production, right? Shipping more things faster, higher quality work faster. Establishing a shared vocabulary so that designers and developers and project people and stakeholders are all calling the admin bar, not the gray top bar or whatever, right? Making things easier to test, making things more responsive, more flexible, more performant. A useful reference for the team to come back to, and laying down this sort of foundation for the team to grow and evolve over time. All of those other benefits are all team-facing rather than user-facing, right? So these design systems are tools for us to use to better communicate and collaborate with one another. So how do we actually make these happen? In my own work and as sort of a consultant and going into different companies to help them design and build these design systems, starting with research and user interviews is a great idea. Just because obviously you're able to sort of check the pulse of where the organization is on their journey to having a more unified UI language. And you end up with all these great pull quotes. You could probably carbon date our UIs based on what you're looking at, right? The main challenge is the existing thousands of lines of code acquisitions and existing suite of technologies that make up $1 billion a year. We'd like to not lose that $1 billion. Fair enough, I suppose, right? There's a lot of institutional knowledge here locked up in people's heads. Slack channels are great, but it becomes a scavenger hunt to find information. Right, for a basic span collapse pattern, the devs spent 2 days going to different teams to find the code and still had to rebuild it themselves. Right? I'm sure it might sound familiar. But so this stuff helps, establish these sort of key themes and trends and really sort of, again, gets at what are people struggling with and how might a design system help address those issues, right? And what we do from there is take that into like a formal kickoff. And we do something called the priorities exercise, which is we basically start off, this is my good friend and colleague, Josh Clark, a very flattering photo of him, he loves it. But this is our friends at About.com right here in Times Square. And sort of after doing these interviews, we sort of reflect the stuff back. Like, here's some of the key themes that we hear. And we sort of take these tear sheets and put them up on the wall and have everybody, in a very democratic way, each person gets about 5 sticky notes to vote on. And we'll sort of stick these up against the wall, right? So everybody's going around, they're sort of like silently voting on this stuff. But then we have a conversation about basically, here's what things are most important to us as a group, right? As a team of stakeholders, here's why this stuff matters. And let's also talk about the things that didn't get any votes, right? Why didn't they get any votes and stuff like that? What this does is helps create priorities, right? Creates a sense of, okay, if push comes to shove, the design system's really gonna have to nail these 3 things. It's not that the other things aren't going to matter at all, it's just that we're trying to get a sense of priority. And you could do this with features of the style guide itself and stuff. It's like, what features do you think the style guide should include in order to be most helpful and stuff? So you could do it with more tactical stuff as well. So this priorities workshop really helps get that alignment and sort of that broad consensus around, like, yeah, we all agreed as a group in a very democratic way how we should sort of proceed with this. Once we get to the end of that, we regroup and sort of reflect back, like, okay, here's some of the things that we did, here's where we landed on certain things, and here's what we're gonna do next. Again, this is our friends at About.com, and I like showing this picture just because it shows like how many people are involved in this process. This isn't just like 3 people off in a room making these decisions on their own. It's a very inclusive process because these are the people that are going to be affected by the design system. Okay, so once that happens, you have sort of a good direction of sort of what matters, what problems need solved and stuff. And what this translates to, ultimately, are a set of design principles. Luke Wroblewski wonderfully articulated the benefits of design principles, that they're the guiding light for any application, right? They articulate the fundamental goals that all decisions could be measured against, and thereby keep the pieces of the project moving towards an integrated whole, right? It helps guide literally every decision, business decision, development decision, design decision, as you sort of go through this process of spinning up a design system. And what we found in our own work is that we end up with sort of a couple sets of principles. One are the design principles that are going to guide our process as design system creators, like the people that are actually putting the stuff together. And then the product itself will sort of embrace its own sort of design principles. So for a recent project, this is sort of where we landed with some of our process design principles, right? We interviewed tons and tons of different people. This was an organization that literally employs 11,000 developers. So we had like almost none of them front-end people. So this idea of just sort of making it really quick and easy to sort of grab and copy and paste and go is really important. Making it scale to different technologies and stuff like that. Some of these things are just sort of general good practices, but some are very specific to the organization. But then the actual product, once we achieved, we actually built the thing, the system itself ended up sort of embracing its own sort of set of design principles, right? Strong and direct, not using a lot of rounded corners and drop shadows and stuff like that, squaring things off, solid colors and all that good stuff. And we see this across many, many, many different systems, right? From operating systems, to iOS, the HIG, and all of that stuff, right? But these are, again, the principles that undergird every aspect of the system. Jared Spool has a really wonderful stress test for how to create good design principles, and he has these tests, which is great. Like, does it come from research? Like, are these born of real issues that people are facing? Does it help you say no to things, right? Does it help you distinguish, your design from your competitors? If it's like, make it clean and fast, and clean and simple, just make it clean and simple. How about clean and simple? That's like, so of course we're going to make it clean and simple, right? Is it something you might reverse in a future release? Have you evaluated it? Is it tested? Is this like actually, not just something you're putting there and ignoring? But yeah, so again, design principles really do underpin every decision you're making as you go forth on this and embark on these projects. So so we have a set of principles. We have needs that we understand we're going to address. Before we actually sort of roll up our sleeves and start building out components, building out cards and buttons and form inputs and stuff like that, we have to make some decisions around how we're going to work together. And there's a couple different flavors of that, right? Sort of like the intradisciplinary stuff, right? So designers, visual designers working with other visual designers, front-end developers working with other front-end developers, and then there's the sort of interdisciplinary stuff, right? How all those people work together as a group. So how many people have used Adobe's Creative Cloud libraries in here? You like it? There's like a lot of, there's like weird like hands, it's like mimes, yeah. All right, so it sounds good, but like what this does is like it allows you to extract, color palettes, typographies, symbols, and all sorts of stuff, and sort of share those across the team. So that's a great way for people working in those tools to sort of help, get a bit closer together so that you're not copying and pasting and using the wrong blue or whatever. Anybody play around with Figma? Anyone familiar with Figma? So Figma is sort of like all that crazy goofy stuff that Vitaly was just doing with Google Docs, only it's a design tool. That's pretty neat. So that obviously puts people in the same document, so that sort of helps put those designers closer and closer together, and hopefully that means less of a disconnect between designer A and designer B. Then there's anybody using Craft by InVision? I'll play this little video real quick.
That's not all.
Oh my God.
You can sync your brand and UI components to the cloud, so everyone on your team has the most current stuff. And if something gets updated, everybody has it. Craft also builds style guides for you with a click, giving unparalleled control over colors, fonts, and text styles. Change it once, see it everywhere. That's not all.
Anybody play that music as you use Craft by InVision? But that's great, right? Again, I'm so excited that more and more people are sort of addressing these issues. This is another tool called Brand AI. This does not have electric guitars, but I'll play
Back in our
anyways.
master design document, I can make some design changes to the analytics button. These changes could just as well have been made by another designer on the team.
They have like spa
When I
music.
upload the button to Brand AI, I choose just that layer. This way, if other designers are working on other parts of the design system, I don't have to overwrite their changes. Finally, back in Joe's web page design file, you can just click Add Styles and Symbols to the document, and the changes I've made to the button automatically change and reflect in his new design.
So there we go. Again, it's great to see so many people starting to tackle these problems, because gone are the days of, having to wade through 70 PSDs if the client goes, you know what, let's not have those button corners rounded anymore, right? But just even in a more like sort of crude sense, just some of the more infrastructural stuff. Is anyone familiar with Dan Rose's wonderful Photoshop etiquette site? Definitely check that out, even if you are one of those people that were screaming for the sketch stuff, because there's just some really good advice around sort of naming things and folder structure and all that stuff. These are all important things as you sort of work with different teams. And I can't tell you how many projects I've worked on where all of that just goes to shit, like immediately. So like formalize that stuff, put that aside, and then just work that way. From a front-end perspective, same thing applies, right? You need to make some decisions of how you're going to write your front-end code. I created something called the Front-End Guidelines Questionnaire, which is a little questionnaire I do with a lot of different front-end teams and the work that I do and consult with. And you get all of those opinionated developers in a room together, and you go through and make some decisions around, like, what are the principles we think of as we write HTML, right? What are these things that are most important to us? Is it semantics? Is it accessibility? Is it making sure that, all of that stuff. Spacers or tabs, yes, you go there. And just, again, make a decision and carry on, right? Are you going to use SMAX? Are you going to use BEM? Are you going to use something else, right? Oh, CSS or whatever. What tools are you going to use to help you write CSS together, right? What tools are you going to use in the JavaScript world, right? What libraries are you using? What are your build processes? Like, how are people going to get that stuff? Does everyone know what that stuff is, right? So again, just making these decisions and not, jumping down people's throat if they don't know what that stuff is, right? But you have to bake that into the process and get that alignment. We also have to set up, as front-end developers, the environment that we're going to actually build these components and build these pages and build all the pieces of the system. Recently, I sort of finally, I think, found a way to talk about sort of the pattern library and design system sort of, dev environment universe. I call it sort of the workshop in the storefront. So my wife is a jeweler. She runs her own jewelry business. And she has a workshop. This is her workshop. This is the space that she lives in most of her waking hours to craft things out of metal and experiment and prototype and break things and, blend things together and all of that, right? Solder with an acetylene tank and all that stuff, right? You can see there's even like patterns and stuff. It's pretty cool. It's very similar, right? But this is the environment that she has created so that she could be productive, right, in the work as she's actually creating, as she's actually doing things. It's sort of like a no-nonsense place where everything is within reach. Things are designed for her to get stuff out the door and be creative. That is a much different environment than the place she's actually showcasing her final work and presenting it to her intended audience, right? So her website, her Etsy shop, that provides all sorts of different contexts, right? Here's the name of this thing. Here's how much it costs. Here's some, overview information. Here's, what materials went into this. Here's how the process was. You could learn more about her, right? All of this stuff, all of this extra contextual information is designed to help people hopefully make a purchasing decision, right? Her Instagram page is where she showcases her final work, right? Live shows is where she showcases her work, right? So these are much different environments than the place that she's actually, rolling up her sleeves and being productive. So in our world, there's over 103 sort of pattern library and style guide related tools out there. We have to make a decision on which tools we're going to reach for in order to build a style guide, in order to build our design system. I work on a tool called Pattern Lab, and what Pattern Lab, I've been working on this since 2013, and I've never sort of fully had a good understanding of sort of how to talk about it, because it always gets clumped in with like, oh, it's a style guide tool, but not really. It's more the workshop. It's the workshop where we design and build these front-end patterns, right? Design these UI components like a data table, and we're able to sort of display those components. We're able to put them into context of a template, right? But then take that a step further and actually pour real representative content into those components to make sure that they're actually serving the needs of the organization and the real specific business use cases as well, right? We're able to see, like, does this hold up whenever we pour this kind of content in it? does this pattern hold up whenever we put it, in a container that doesn't scale the full width of the page, and we put this other kind of information in it? Does it hold up whenever we put really complex information inside of it? Does it hold up on smaller screens as we sort of resize the browser and fire it up on different devices, right? So this is, again, very similar to my wife's workshop, where she's stress testing things, she's prototyping things, she's throwing a lot of stuff against the wall and is iterating on these things until she arrives at something that's worth putting out in the storefront. The storefront then becomes the style guide, which is the happy home for all the ingredients of the design system, right? And again, this is serving a different purpose than the environment you're actually creating things in. Right, so here, we're not saying, here's the table and here's how to build it. It's more, here's the table and here's how you implement it, right? Here's the code snippets for getting at that table code. Here's the usage. Here's how we want you to think about responsive design with respect to data tables. Here's how we want to think about data density. Here's all the different class names and what those all are and which ones are required and stuff like that. So this is a different use case meant for the people who are ultimately going to be reaching for these patterns and using them and injecting them into their own applications. So we see it as sort of this thing, right, or pattern library, or whatever dev environment sort of setup you have, whether it's Fractal or like something else, there's a bunch of tools out there, right? And then sort of we found that just sort of a grunt or gulp sort of copy task serves as the delivery truck to sort of feed that stuff into a style guide, where then the manager of the store is able to go back into the inventory room and decide which things we decide to show to the actual users of the design system. So Pattern Lab's been around for a while, and again, like I'm not here, it's the open source tool or whatever, but it's sort of neither here nor there. It's just the one that I'm familiar with, but use your tool of choice. From a style guide perspective, we didn't have that piece of the puzzle in place, so we had to build one. So just like maybe like a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, launched this thing, which is called the Style Guide, which is basically a shell, like a vanilla shell for a style guide. So it has like basic information architecture for like, here's a getting started page. Here's like our guidelines overview page. Here's our design principles page. And of course, like you have to fill in the blanks and replace all the design and code for yourself or whatever. But the idea is it sort of gives you a shell. It gives you a starting point. So if you want to check that out, you can find that here. Okay. So now we're finally ready to work. The intradisciplinary part, everybody has their tools set up, everybody sort of, has an understanding of how they're going to write code, how they're going to design together. But then there's the sort of interdisciplinary part of it. And this is the part that's historically been pretty hard, because this is the former waterfall process of like, cool, I'm done with design, right? Have fun, asshole. Right? And of course, this process, doesn't always lead to the best results. I like to say, how many designers in the room have ever been ashamed to put a live link to the website because you're like, that's not what I designed, yeah, right? So that's not good, right? So how many people just like had a heart attack like looking at this stuff, right? Like these days of like trying to go in and sort of sort this stuff out, right? So how do we work together as a team? How do we collaborate more? There's a bunch of different techniques and tactics. I'll sort of quickly walk through this notion of design tokens, which was really popularized by Salesforce and their Lightning design system. Basically, what these design tokens are these sort of abstracted properties. So if you work at Starbucks and you have, internal communications, you have native apps, you have a marketing site, you have an intranet, you have a product, they're all using Starbucks Green, right? How do you ensure that everybody is going to be using Starbucks Green without resorting to the eyedropper and stuff? So this is where these design tokens really come in to sort of serve as this sort of technology agnostic source of truth for these variables, right? It's Starbucks Green in the abstract. And you could apply this to all sorts of different properties, right? Background colors, type colors, font families, font sizes, all of that stuff, right? And tools like Brand AI allow you to sort of round up and provide a GUI for managing that stuff. So you might have brand colors with brand green, neutral palettes and stuff like that. Here's what fonts we use. Here's our headings. Here's our icons with stars and rocket ships and poop emojis or whatever. And then all the way through to border radius and spacing defaults and stuff like that, right? So it's nice to have this thing. What's cool about this tool is that it beams those things. It can export those things and integrate into tools like Sketch and Slack and sort of exporting it as SAS variables or less variables, or even into tools like PowerPoint or Microsoft Office and stuff. So just sort of show real quick what that looks like. So if I have all of my design tokens sort of identified here, and I have, okay, here's my primary heading in Brand AI, and I have a sketch file, and they have a little plugin or whatever. So if I wanted to come over, and then there's my primary heading in Pattern Lab, and if I make a change to that thing, I'm going to change it to gray or brown or whatever, it's already there. I sync that to the document. It gets those updated styles. I run my command that pulls it down from their source, and then rebuild Pattern Lab, and then go back over into the browser. And basically, these get exported as like mix-ins or whatever. And so it's cool because, boom, there you go, right? So you're sort of managing this stuff all in one place. So that helps sort of bridge that gap between design and development and sort of like maintain this stuff in one place. Recently, Airbnb released their new tool that basically takes their code base and then backfills it into Sketch, which means that people in Sketch, the designers in Sketch, could be building things and using the actual real React components sort of to design with inside of Sketch. And that's pretty cool because that, again, it keeps a single source of truth, and then that means that the design team can sort of confidently work with those designs and sort of play around and pipe in different data to make that stuff work. So there's great tools out there, but it's true that even in 2017, there's still this stuff, this nonsense. Lots of Medium articles I found. Published websites directly from Sketch. Sketch, no coding needed. Oh, thank God, right? Translating a visual design to CSS and HTML is now a mundane task of the past, right? The responsibility for all things UI is back in the hands of designers. We don't have to talk to those curmudgeon-y developers anymore, thank God, right? So, no tool or tactic is going to substitute actual human collaboration and communication. And in my own work, we did a redesign for TechCrunch a few years ago. My work with Dan Mall involved like him sort of sketching things up like this inside of Photoshop or whatever, but me sort of building an adjacent HTML prototype, and then us working together to sort of massage this stuff into place and arrive at a solution that looks good, but also is responsive, is performant, is accessible, displays the true color and the true text rendering and all of that stuff, shows interactivity and all that stuff. So it's not one or the other. It's both of these things, and designers and developers working together to take something from like a stupid HTML prototype that can be done in like literally 2 minutes and sort of evolve that design into something that the whole team is happy with. It's this sort of process of designing and building and communicating and collaborating with one another in order to sort of get things into the final environment much faster. And yes, this means that sometimes that we end up leapfrogging over these tools that we spent a long time mastering, right? If you could go have a component library in place, do a whiteboard sketch, and build that out in HTML like 5 minutes later, then that's great. Right? Because I really want your brain as a designer. I don't necessarily need your artifacts. I want all of your great thinking. I want your aesthetic sensibility. I want your UX sensibilities. So communication and communication really beat deliverables. So all right. So I hope you find your place on the spectrum. I hope you're able to sort of establish these principles and guidelines at your own organization. And I think that, as time goes on, the world is a crazy place or whatever, it's like I do think that we need to actively and intentionally find, this common ground for us to stand on, right? We have more in common than we have, that's different. We just have to seek out those common human principles and find that common ground in order to do great things together. So, if you're interested in all this sort of design system stuff, learning more about collaboration, communication, stuff like that, wrote a book called Atomic Design. With that, thank you very much for your time.